I guess if we cut to the summary here, unfortunately more of the same for the short term in our weather with with this pattern that never seems to end. But that said, there are definitely signs. We talked about hints of this last week, and there are even more signs now that there will be at least a temporary change coming up later next week and probably into early July. And I'll talk about that in just a second. Looking at the last week, no big surprise, cool and wet. For most of the state, you've got rainfall totals on the left side, and these are through yesterday morning at 8 o'clock. And of course, as Bruce mentioned to begin with, we've had significant rainfall in many parts of the state since then. Actually, just looking at some radar totals estimates here, in some cases along I-94 and south of that, we've had some 2-inch rainfalls here just in the last 24 hours, but widespread 1/2 to 1 inch or greater totals across much of really at least the southern half of lower Michigan. But again, the heaviest totals have been down in the far south, and that follows a pattern and a trend that we have seen for much of the last several weeks. Even heavier rainfall as you go south into Indiana, Illinois, in Ohio. So again, more of the same. At the same time, on the right side, with looking at our temperature departures, several degrees, 5 to 7 degrees below normal here for this last week. It is important and I think interesting to note, and we may have mentioned this in earlier talks, but yes, our temperatures have been significantly cooler than normal for much of the spring thus far. But the interesting thing is, if you break those down, most of the departure has been during the daytime. If we look at our both max and min temperatures on average have been below normal, but especially during the day. And I don't have the graphic up here, but during the last week, for example, our daytime temperatures were in some cases as much as 10 degrees Fahrenheit below where they typically are. So, and I think as everyone appreciates, we just have not had any hot weather, certainly. We had on the sunny day that we had here locally in East Lansing here a couple days ago on Tuesday, we actually made it up to 82, and that is here locally, that is the warmest temperature we've observed so far this growing season. That's very unusual. Actually, it's near a record for the time of the year. There's been no 90-degree weather in the state, and that's true for most of the Corn Belt and for most of the Midwest. But cool and wet definitely has been the pattern. And Bruce, if you could advance, there's one more thing to say about that, and that is with cooler weather, lots of clouds, our solar radiation and our potential evapotranspiration rates have been much below normal. What you're looking at here, Aaron Polly in the Climate Lab here put this together. We looked at some data from EnviroWeather for the last 20 years. We've got some longer records now in our EnviroWeather system. On the lower left is a histogram basically showing the distribution of daily average solar radiation from the beginning of April through the middle of June for the last 20 years. This is at East Lansing, but it's representative for most places in the state. And what you can see there is that on average that value in terms of, and this is expressed in Langley's per day, is somewhere around the median, the 50th percentile here is about 425 Langley's per day. 2019, we've been way below that, at least 20% less than that. Our average this year has only been about 325 Langley's per day, and that's very typical for Michigan. And to put that into a little bit more historical perspective, on the right-hand side are our rankings for 3 sites that we looked at, some statistics real quick. And at many of the sites, it is the lowest value on average for the last 20 years, both at East Lansing and at Sparta. This would also be true as you go north in the state. Our Petersburg Deerfield site down in Monroe County, you can see, is a little bit more than that at the third lowest, but needless to say, it has been cool, wet, and cloudy. Many more wet days than typically is the case at this time of the year. So our solar values have been down, and just as importantly, because of that, our potential evapotranspiration rates have also been unusually or abnormally low. So again, the water, once it gets into the landscape, it tends to stay there longer than it would be the case otherwise. Let's move ahead, Bruce, if we could. Our weather map this morning here, and this, again, we could have used this map pretty close to what we had last week, and several of the past weeks there would not be much change. we have a little area of low pressure to our south, and that's what's causing the rainfall across the state. The lower right corner there, that's one of the latest regional radar loops. You can see rainfall, widespread rainfall across much of the southern two-thirds of the lower peninsula. The good news is that is going to gradually move to the east and north here later on during the day. It should be coming to an end certainly by mid-late afternoon, and then finally by evening in the far eastern parts of the state. So just a few more hours on the negative side. There are some heavy pockets of rainfall embedded in this, and there still could be some heavy rain, maybe even some localized flooding, given how saturated the soils are and the landscape is. That would be especially true for the southern half of the lower peninsula. But again, this just continues the pattern that we've been stuck in for so long. Let's advance to tomorrow morning. This is 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, and I guess the great news is after we see the rainfall come to an end later today and overnight tonight, high pressure moves into the state at least for the next 24 or 36 hours, and that's Friday, tomorrow is going to be a beautiful day for most of the state. Near seasonable, maybe a degree or two below normal temperatures in the 70s for most locations, but it should be dry and less humid, and again, almost seasonably warm. But off to our west, you can see the next weather system that's approaching from the west, and that would arrive with the next chance for rainfall after today, probably as early as late Friday. But I think right now the guidance is suggesting that the rainfall, or the threat of rainfall, will hold off probably in most areas at least until Saturday. So next slide here for Saturday morning, you can see another area of low pressure and some frontal boundaries with that. That's the next weather system. And I guess the bad news about this one is that this is not going to be going anywhere fast. Once this system moves in later on Saturday, it will persist through Sunday, even into Monday and maybe Tuesday as well, with a lingering chance for rainfall. Again, not going to be, or it's not going to go anywhere quickly. The greatest chances for rainfall with the next weather system here this weekend will be across southern and especially southwestern parts of the state, where we could see some heavier totals. Right now, the greatest threat for rainfall, I would say, it really picks up during the day on Saturday night, but I think Sunday is when we will probably statewide have the largest threat. Most areas will pick up some rainfall, and then that will persist probably into Monday with a lingering chance for some additional rainfall on Tuesday. The other thing to note about the forecast is here, it will be warmer. Our temperatures will pick up, especially beginning tomorrow and into the weekend. And it's been a while since we could say this, but actually almost near seasonable temperatures, mostly across 70s across the state, with some 80s, maybe some low 80s in the far south, but that's pretty close to where we should be. Remember, tomorrow, 21st, is Midsummer Day, or summer solstice, the longest day of the year, at least in terms of solar radiation. Certainly one of the near the peak of our solar radiation for the season. Now, beyond this, it does look like some drier weather by the middle of next week, but again, temperatures will be on the increase. And Bruce, if we could go to the next image, our precipitation totals here through next Thursday, collectively for 7 days. Again, this map looks very, very similar to where we've been the last 2 weeks. Still significant precip forecasts. A lot of this is coming this weekend, but you can see a very pronounced north to south gradient, less than half an inch in some cases in far northern parts of the state, to well over 1 inch in the south, especially the southwest. And we could see some heavier 2-inch plus totals are possible, certainly in the southern couple tiers of counties. Again, if that happens, that would be most likely late Saturday, Sunday into early Monday. But that said, let's move to the next one. I mentioned changes at the outset. On the low, this is the 6 to 10 day outlook for the 25th through the 29th of June, and there are big changes, and we have to look at the jet stream. That's the map on the lower left, and what you can see is that the troughing feature that has been stuck over the southwestern U.S. for so long shifts a little bit to the west, out over the Pacific coast, more importantly to the east we've got a big ridge building over the Great Plains into the Midwest, and that's the key feature here for our weather. And if you look at, remember meteorologically, if you're underneath one of these ridges in the mid-latitudes, you can usually count on at least warmer than normal type temperatures, and depending on where in the ridge you are, typically normal to below normal rainfall, and that is certainly the pattern, or at least the direction I think that we're headed here for the end of the month into early July. On the right, upper right, mean temperatures forecast to be above normal. I don't even remember the last time we could say that we saw that in one of these outlooks. And on the lower right, precipitation totals, still above normal precipitation forecast for southern parts of and southeastern parts of the U.S., but for the upper Midwest and for the Great Lakes, you can see the near normal. And I think that's probably a good bet based on what I've seen. And Bruce, one more here. For the 8 to 14-day outlook, this pattern continues on into early July. Note in the lower left, the upper ridge builds, it strengthens over right over the Great Lakes region, and along with that, not surprisingly, the weather scenario I talked about, warmer and probably maybe a little bit drier than normal, at least a temporary spell of a change in where we've been. Of course, I think the big question becomes is how long does this pattern persist? Does it stay around for a while? There's a hint that it may not, that we may switch to something different. We do have the Climate Prediction Center at NOAA will be coming out with a brand new ensemble of long lead outlooks here later today, and we'll share those with you next week. But my guess is that the long lead outlook's probably not much change from where we've been earlier, and that's still expecting at least normal to above normal precipitation for the next couple months, especially as you go south and west of Michigan. But at least for the near term, or for the middle term future here, for the last parts of the last week of June and for the early part of July, it definitely looks like we are headed to at least a temporary change towards warmer and drier. So let's, Bruce, if we could, last one, wrapping up here. Rain ending here later today from west to east, and a beautiful day coming tomorrow. And I mean, with any luck, parts of Saturday, a lot of Saturday may be fair and dry as well before the next weather system moves in. That comes for most of the state late Saturday and then persists on Sunday and into early next week, possibly as long as Tuesday. Some heavier rainfall totals, unfortunately, are possible. I don't think they'll be widespread, but they certainly are possible this weekend in southern parts of the state. The other note here, again, we are shifting towards a warmer pattern. Our temperatures are going to pick up, are going to be closer to normal, and even probably go above normal some point during the next week. And that segues us into the medium range towards, again, a warmer and possibly a little even drier than normal here by the end of the month into early July.